Let's do an improbable one, shall we? I don't even know how my brain did this, but I was scrolling through charts, clicking around, and I realized that I think I was looking at Johnny Cash's chart, having just looked at Elizabeth Taylor's chart within 5 minutes, and my brain went, same chart. And I thought, is these people were basically born on the same day, and I have layered them so you can see very clearly that in fact, yes, they were born within a day of one another. Johnny Cash February 26th, Elizabeth Taylor February 27th. So I thought I would do a thing for you guys on birthday twins, which is not a technical term and it's not an astrological term, but to give you a sense of how the same energy can uh, portray itself differently, yet also somehow similarly. And people who are born at the same time tend to have major life events around the same time. Now, I have not watched a documentary on either one of these people. I read their Wikipedia pages. And this is also my second attempt at making this video. I did the full video already today, and I screwed up several times because I was talking too fast. So I literally said the wrong planet. And then I was watching it back and calling myself names. So I'm gonna do it right this time, damn it. And this is so basically I'm saying I'm not an expert on either of them. I'm doing broad strokes with basically what you know biographically about them, being relatively ignorant. Additionally, I will also say in my defense, because for for those of you who care, occasionally, like every 8 years or so, I just completely drop off the map and stop reading the news for a while. That happened again. And that's why we are kicking it old school with people who were born in the 30s, because I'm not paying attention to what's going on right now. Cool? Cool. Okay. I'm starting with layering these two charts just so that you can see how closely the energies are linked together or not. What may jump out to you, but if it doesn't, I'm going to point it out, is the fact that so Elizabeth Taylor is on the outer ring. Elizabeth Taylor's moon is 8 degrees ahead of Johnny Cash's moon. So the moon in Elizabeth Taylor's chart does dramatically different things. Johnny Cash is on the inside. And I'm going to actually just make this a little bit less confusing in a second by taking actually both of them away and then adding back. But I want to just point out, when you're born within a couple of days of each other, the major outer planets are in the same place. And it can be a couple days, couple weeks. Around the time I was born, everything was stopped in the sky from Jupiter on out. So people born within 3 weeks of me on either side, all of our planets are in exactly the same place. That wasn't necessarily the case here, but they're within a day. So here they are. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And so what Taylor and Cash have in common, that we will come back to several times in several different ways, is the fact that Neptune opposes their Sun, Mercury, Mars combination. Johnny Cash's is actually a little bit closer than Elizabeth Taylor's. And Pluto at the time was squaring Uranus. And their Veni were pulled into that square. So having Neptune opposite your Sun would give you usually an artistic bend to your personality. And having Pluto and Uranus square each other by themselves without anything else. So Pluto in Cancer was very much about traditional family values, white picket fence. There was a lot about fitting in, but nuclear family was really important to people with Pluto in Cancer, most of whom have passed on at this point, or they would be really up there in years. But the Pluto in Cancer wants, more than anything, a home, family, like heart-oriented place to chill out and be safe. And Uranus in Aries wants absolutely nothing to do with that. Uranus in Aries wants to rebel, wants to stand up and fight for what they believe in. And so those chafe against each other. And for both, Taylor and Cash, Venus gets pulled in. They kind of portray themselves, the Venus portrays itself in a more obvious way, I think, with Taylor, but I think that I can make a compelling argument either way. So let's take everything away just so that it's a little bit less confusing for roughly 2 seconds, and then I'll go ahead and make it confusing again. But we're going to start with Johnny Cash. So if I were to say, just make your mind go blank. If I were to say, and you know anything about astrology, I'm going to talk about a double Pisces with the Pisces sun in the 12th house and a Scorpio moon. And by the way, the sun is opposite Neptune. How hard do you roll your eyes? I'm sorry, Pisces, I'm going to hurt your feelings. Because one Pisces is enough. Double Pisces with the sun in the Pisces house, which is the 12th house. That's somebody who is, on a good day, in touch with the ethos around them, in touch with psychological whims that are just kind of vapors. So able to feel around their environment for what's going on. Usually somebody who's going to catch on quickly, but also somebody who is going to space out. And so they're like connected yet disconnected. That's just the sun in the 12th house. And that's by itself without the Mercury and the Mars. And I could do this all day. I could keep going because like every time I look at these charts, I notice something else. But then the sun in the 12th house being opposed by Neptune in the 6th house, it's kind of like backwards. Like Neptune belongs in the 12th house naturally because it's like, that's the subconscious planet belongs in the subconscious house, but it's in one of the more conscious houses, like when you're as, laser focused as you can get, but having Neptune in this house natally is going to make it pretty hard to be laser focused. Additionally, I think it's probably a little bit easier for Johnny Cash to have this aspect than Elizabeth Taylor, and I'll get into that. But the Sun Neptune opposition, it's like whenever you do your ego, so you're being you. That's what you do when you are doing your sun. You're being you. The Neptune opposition, whoever's opposing you, or the other, quote unquote, would receive being you in strange ways. So if you portray yourself and you think that you're being super clear and super straightforward, you're going to be met with like just mixed results. And usually doing something you don't necessarily intend to do, having an outcome that you don't expect to have, or, you do something really artistic and people say like, oh my God, it's the most profound thing that I've ever heard. And you were joking or you're joking and people take you seriously. It's just, you have to live your life like this when you have this setup, but it's usually pretty surprising results, or people can revere you and you don't feel like you deserve it, or people can kick down at you and you don't think that you deserve it. The Neptune sun, like anytime you try to do something really artistic or portray being you, it's basically not up to you to determine the outcome, because Neptune subtracts your ego from the equation. So there's ego problems, and that's actually a better option, because often when you find Sun Neptune oppositions, there's kind of a sense of like, who, me? It couldn't have been me. I didn't do that. Or, they can subtract themselves from the equation of like, they did something on purpose, but then like the second after they did it, they're like, oh no, wait, I didn't mean it that way. It's a little bit dicey. It's a good aspect to have if you're an artist, and the two people that we're talking about today were really, really famous artists, so they made the most of this energy, but I'm just saying it's tough energy to have. For Johnny Cash, who we can agree was attracted to women, it's a little bit easier to have, in my opinion, because both Sun and Mars, those are signifiers for men. So Johnny Cash would have interesting experiences with men, and the experience of masculinity and self-assertion, right? Because he was a man. Elizabeth Taylor, on the other hand, would have some displacement issues with the men that she was attracted to. So, but what I mean by that is you can project parts of yourself onto other people and think that it's them who's carrying that energy, when really it's your own energy. So like you project out what you would like to see, rather than what actually there is, or you can assign parts of your personality to someone else and then get that back and think that it's you. And if you're attracted to men and you have a Sun and Mars being opposed by Neptune, it just brings some, I'm trying to think of a non-controversial word. It brings displacement into the equation, and often you wind up in victim savior types of situations. You're trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved, or you're projecting a lot of qualities onto someone that those qualities actually aren't there. It's just what you want to see. You can try to get someone to save you, and really you need to save yourself. There's a lot. Like Neptune really is ego dissolving, and it can make your dealings with men pretty weird. Okay? And I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I am just trying to talk about what I've noticed in people with these types of aspects. So, people I know who have a Sun-Neptune opposition who date men will find these guys and introduce you to them, and you'd be scratching your head like, what on earth do you see in this person? And often they inflate, like, this person's so great, they're so funny, they're so talented, etc., etc., etc. Turns out it's my friend who's talented, not the guy. And then eventually the spell gets broken, and they find out that, this person who they've inflated is not worth their time or their attention. Unless you learn that this is a pattern, and you learn to own all of the energy, and you learn to recognize when you're projecting stuff on other people, you're really going to have a rough time. So it's a hard aspect to have if you're someone who wants to date men, which Johnny Cash did not. On Johnny Cash's issue, which we'll get more into in a little bit, is so all of this is in a subconscious house, and this Neptune here is in one of the more conscious houses. This can have a lot to do with being super artistic, but also super spacing out. And one of the things that Johnny Cash was known for is having substance abuse issues. And this is not slam dunk if you have this going on in your chart. That this isn't me saying you're going to be an alcoholic or you're going to have a drug problem, but it does lend itself to a propensity for that if you are not aware of that tendency. It's like this is a chart that needs to space out from time to time. Period. The end can be super artistic, will have to be super spacey. Just in order, because you're dealing with so much subconscious energy. This combination, it's super towing the balance between conscious and subconscious, and you kind of have to sacrifice some of what you're trying to do consciously to Neptune in order to find that balance. So it's like you have to be creative, you have to incorporate creativity into your life, or you have to be spiritual, you have to incorporate some amount of spirituality into your life. You basically have to pay the piper, and in this case, the piper is Neptune. It's not my favorite planet. Okay. Another note, both Taylor and Johnny Cash have Scorpio moons. Johnny Cash's makes a nice trine aspect to his sun and Mercury and, Mars mostly. I tend to use narrower orbs, meaning mathematical distances, but I would count this as moon trine Mars. And then a nice little sextile here between moon and Neptune. Scorpio moons are emotionally intense, period, the end. I don't care where your Scorpio moon is. I don't care what aspect it is making. You need emotional depth and people to be real with you in order to feel nourished. In Johnny Cash's case, doing what I'm just going to assume is creativity, because it's creativity at best, and he was a very creative person. We could also say spacing out, but doing this Sun, Mercury, Mars stuff feeds his moon. So doing his ego, doing creativity, doing 12th house things, being super spiritual, being connected to the ethos around him feeds the moon. And then Neptune here, picking up stuff in his day-to-day environment, of an emotional nature, because it's Neptune, feeds the moon, but in a friendly way. So just being able to see what people are about and know what's going on in his environment, it feeds the moon. These are nice aspects. So it's an intense moon, and often with Scorpio moons especially, the early life has some life or death types of intensity, which is the case. We'll talk about that in a second. It gives you that tendency to take emotional stuff really seriously. Just Scorpio moons, they're good people, but they like their intensity and you can't take it away from them. So it's just like, why are you at a 10 right now? Just let them be at a 10. Another thing that, why don't we talk about it right now? So the first house Uranus situation, that's just the need to be the rebel. And having Venus pulled into that, doing art that's different. Venus is really artistic. Liking what you like, and letting what you like be different. For his moon makes nice aspects. This Venus is a little bit, it's disruptive because it's with Uranus, but as signifiers for women go, and Johnny Cash is someone who is attracted to women, you like someone who's different, but the moon is the other signifier. You're gonna want to have a more friendly, more nourishing relationship with women. But being the mark of the rebel, Johnny Cash was not afraid to hold positions that were different from the other people around him, and he was willing to buck trends, and he was an activist, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. All right, where do I want to go next? we'll just do the moon differential. So, like I said, there's 8 degrees between these two moons. And we're looking at a very different chart here. Elizabeth Taylor has nothing in the 12th house. Elizabeth Taylor, two things I think that I want to point out. So she has what's called a grand trine, meaning that there's 120 degrees between her ascendant. Well, we're fudging it because it's not exact, but 120 degrees between the ascendant, the Uranus-Venus combination here, and then her chart ruler, which is Jupiter in Leo. So that means that if any of these 3 points get stimulated by anything, and stimulated it just means energized. So even the moon can be energizing. It really depends on your sensitivity to what energies. But guys, one word, drama. And that's clear, right? This is somebody who I think lived life on maximum volume. Is that fair to say? She just, creative, talented, beautiful, dramatic. And so the aspects to the ascendant, which is you and how you portray yourself, they're just loud. She wasn't afraid to be different, especially as she aged into these aspects. She took her time getting anywhere. She was she was beautiful, but she also was very concerned with being beautiful. She was a dramatic actress, and so this is a good chart for being a dramatic actress. Okay, it just is. So the moon, though, is doing different things. It's over here. It is squaring this Jupiter. That's why I was just circling it. So that means that there is emotional comfort with being dramatic, because the Scorpio moon is dramatic, and then Jupiter over here in Leo feeds that. And then the moon is making an inconjunct aspect to this Uranus-Venus, so it's like you're comfortable being uncomfortable, and you're comfortable with... It's 2 different ways, really. You're comfortable being uncomfortable, and you're comfortable being a rebel, kind of, sort of. So inconjuncts are uncomfortable aspects. But she also has Uranus down at the bottom of her chart, so it's just like who she is deep down is someone who likes turbulence. I don't know if she would have admitted that, but it just is the case. This chart, yes. Then the moon is also trine. I have reduced orbs on my computer, because otherwise everything would draw angles to everything else. But this is a trine between the moon and Pluto, and any aspect between the moon and Pluto, again, means that there's comfort with deep emotional stuff. Okay? So we already talked about the Sun-Neptune opposition that both of them have. That if there wasn't projection in her romantic relationships with men, well, then I don't know what was going on. Something, but let's just say probably that. Another thing between these 2 charts that really makes a difference is the fact that Pluto is right here. So it's in the house of relationships, which is the 7th house. So 1-to-1 relationships are Plutonian by nature, but it is so close to the 8th house. So basically, right after she was born, this Pluto went into the 8th house, which is the sex, death, and other people's money house. And so this is as deep as it gets emotionally, and it's other people's emotional issues that bring up your emotional issues, and it is extreme emotional closeness really getting to the core of who you are as a person, as well as someone else's cores. It's where those two cores meet. There's usually drama and secrets and death and turbulence and other turbulence and more turbulence when Pluto goes through the eighth house. So she had that type of depth energy as a very young child, which it probably means that at least at first it was within her home and family, this depth. And as she aged into it, she would have had really intense emotional relationships that took her to the places that I was just discussing. I should also note, Pluto, goes through different signs at different speeds, but it took forever to go through Leo. So because I already did this video once today, I'll tell you that Pluto took 30 years to go through her eighth house. So, spoiler alert, and we'll get there. But if I were to show you Johnny Cash's chart and Elizabeth Taylor's chart and ask you without the names, and I realize that I've already given you the answer, but if I were to show you the two charts and say which one of these people was married more than 5 times, if you didn't guess this one, I would stare at you incredulously. It's this one. Also, remember that the Pluto is the traditional family values, and this Uranus Venus is basically saying fuck your values. So there's that tension as well. She just kept getting married, but she divorced when divorce was taboo. And she just kept doing it, right? And now it would be very normal to just have boyfriends. There's no need to get married, but there were those traditional values that we're pulling at. This is a tug of war, essentially. And Venus is involved in the rebellious side, but this is a tremendous amount of energy. Also, I should say that Jupiter in the 8th house is an enthusiasm for the emotional depth. So that would make you a great actress, right? Because you can go to emotional places and then just kind of stand up and brush it off. And the Neptune-Sun opposition can do similar things, where you can go to extreme depths and then walk away like nothing happened. Not everyone's capable of that, but this chart is. Anyway, the enthusiasm, this is like jumping in with both feet to committed relationships, where it's just let's get married today. And that it lends itself, it's in good aspect to Venus. So that's also an enthusiasm for, oh, I met this new guy and it's great and we're getting married. And in her case, that's what happened. Okay, so that's part 1 of me making points about things. Here's 1944, and this is when Elizabeth Taylor landed her first movie role and began to get famous. What's happening in this chart? Well, mainly Uranus here is in a square to her sun, and I'm not bothering with precession, which means the movement of the universe, the solar system since birth, because that my software would just not do any favors and you would be more confused. So we're fudging it. We're basically saying this is in the ballpark of this rather than this is exactly this. Cool? Thumbs up. Okay. So this is the 6th house of day-to-day work. Uranus in the 6th house of day-to-day work, or just day-to-day life, because she's 12, just means that in the course of your daily routine, your daily routine gets messed up because it's Neptune, but it also has an impact on your ego right here, which is the sun. And then of course it's also making this square aspect, because anything square the sun in her chart is squaring the Neptune, which is also 3rd house. That's also day-to-day stuff in your immediate environment. Then Neptune, transiting Neptune up here, is making an inconjunct to Mars, which is home and family, right? And who you are at your emotional core. So these are big transits. This is a big deal. Something, and also she's having a Jupiter return, which is usually when lucky things happen to you. So this is Elizabeth Taylor getting famous. Oh, yep, almost forgot. The Pluto here is also in conjuncting her sun. So what does Pluto rule? Pluto rules the 11th house and the 12th house, and the sun, well, is within the 8th house because it's Leo. So the sun rules nothing. But in conjuncts are events out of nowhere that are going to impact her social standing, and then also some subconscious stuff that she has going on. Who knows? We can't ask her. How were you feeling, Elizabeth Taylor? But those were her transits. Now I'm going to take this away and show you Johnny Cash at the same time. This is sad. Okay, this is actually the day that Johnny Cash's older brother died in a freak accident. So I use 1944 just to show you Elizabeth Taylor. I don't know what date she landed her movie role, but this is Johnny Cash's situation with the same energy, okay? So here we see Saturn on a very emotional line. So often when you see Saturn here, something happens that is a tough lesson for you emotionally. I think that would be the fairest way to say it. Now, I'm not saying Johnny Cash did anything wrong. That's not what I mean, but it's like a sobering experience here. Uranus is squaring his sun from the house. This is the house of siblings, and his brother died suddenly. Pluto here is in conjuncting his sun, which is an event out of nowhere that impacts your ego. But then also remember that the sun and Mars are both signifiers for men, males. And then Neptune is in conjuncting Mars at the same time. So sudden out of nowhere impacting someone male. Another thing that's happening, that this is what caught my eye more than anything, is we already talked about Saturn here, but the transiting south node is also on his Saturn, which that also tends to be a sobering experience and impacts authority figures. So parents, grandparents, bosses, when you have the south node over Saturn, like negative developments of a Saturnian nature or reality checks, which I wasn't there, haven't read a biography, haven't watched a video, don't know exactly what happened, except for that it's sad. This is how this same energy impacted him. So 1944 was an important year for both of these people. Good for her, bad for him. And then I guess I should say that in this chart, Scorpio rules his, so Pluto rules his 8th house of death. And so it would be expected, essentially, that a Pluto transit to his sun would bring up those types of experiences. Okay, sadness done. We'll take that away. Now we'll go to 1958, and we'll stick with Johnny Cash. This is when Johnny Cash met June Carter. It is not the exact date. We are gonna use the exact date for Elizabeth Taylor. So in this case, I should say that Johnny Cash met June Carter, but also Johnny Cash had a drug problem. That's an important note. So he's already married at this point to his first wife, and he's meeting June Carter now. What do we see? Well, frankly, here the sun here is now being inconjuncted by Uranus in the 5th house. The 5th house is unbonded love relationships. So this is kind of like a lightning bolt out of nowhere. And it's also children that you have, if you have any, and I think he did by now, but that's not part of the narrative in this video. But that's the first thing. The second thing is that Pluto here is beginning to oppose Mars here. And remember when a bit ago I talked about the consciousness, unconsciousness back and forth that Johnny Cash has in this chart? Well, this Pluto transit is activating the consciousness versus unconsciousness. So this is triggering his 12th house potential for seriously spacing out with drugs. Also, you know what? Pin in that, because remember that Pluto and Mars is transits about issues with a man. Pluto, Sun, same thing. I don't know what was going on with Johnny Cash and men. That's not the one that we're concerned about. Additionally, and me kind of changing the subject a little bit, Jupiter is in his 7th house. So when you have a Jupiter through your 7th house transit, married or not married, you meet people. They can be business partners, they can be romantic interests, they can be really close friends, but you are likely to meet people who you like and get along with. That's Jupiter through the 7th house, regardless of who you are and what you have going on. And then the North Node here moves in the opposite direction from everything else. So everything else is going to the left, and the North Node is going to the right. And the North Node is also the potential for meeting people and having one-to-one relationships of a close nature. It doesn't have to be romantic. It often is. Doesn't have to be. Other important thing. I'm just scanning for additional important things. But yes. So Neptune here is actually leaving his 7th house. So you may have noticed that when his brother died, that Neptune was in the 7th house. It's a long transit, especially given the size of Johnny Cash's 7th house. So when you have Neptune in the 7th house, you tend to encounter even like additional projection issues, which there's already the natal potential here because of the Sun-Neptune opposition, as well as the Mars-Neptune opposition. Neptune through the 7th house can make your relationships funky. And by that, I mean that you can have victim savior stuff come up. You can feel really, really, really super emotionally connected to your partner one day, and then the next day it seems like they're in outer space, or the next day it seems like you're in outer space. Sometimes if you are going through something really emotional for whatever reason, because Neptune is a strange planet, your partner picks up those emotions and portrays them for you. It's a weird time to have Neptune through the 7th, because you really can't rely on your significant other being there consistently. And also, there's just a lot of projection. So with Neptune leaving the 7th house, a lot of the time, if you've been unrealistic about your partner, of like, we can make it work, they'll get better, they'll make me happy eventually, and then Neptune goes into the 8th house, first, it raises different issues, but second, you have a tendency to kind of hit the ground, like, or fall back to earth about who exactly it is you are partnered with. If you haven't been clear on that before, you can experience clarity. So I've seen in my travels around the globe, people who go through the Neptune in the 7th house transit, and then Neptune goes into the 8th house, they get a different set of problems, but they also get divorced. Because they're just like, oh, actually this person is an asshole. And they've been holding out hope the whole time that things were going to get better. And then it can be a rude awakening. Or if you have been in a situation where you can't be with your significant other because they're remote from you, like, let's say you have a partner and like they're doing shift work and you're on a different shift and you just never see them. When Neptune leaves the seventh house, that can get better. So it's not always, oh, you get divorced. It's like there's a disconnect with Neptune through the seventh house that when it goes into the eighth house, you can reconnect. It's possible. That's not what happened here, obviously. Because again, remember, he's married to his first wife here and he meets June Carter. And then also gets addicted to drugs because the eighth house is about kind of wanting to get away from the nastiness and unpleasantness of the world. The eighth house can be very much a wanting to get back in the womb. That type of spacing out of just needing like a warm, cuddly place to hide. So you can reconnect with your partner, but then you can idolize that connection and just need someone like real bad to be real close to. Or you can get a drug problem, or you can do both of those things. And again, if there's the natal potential or if the energy is already there and then you have Neptune going through the eighth house, these are transitions that can just kind of happen. Another thing that the Neptune through the eighth house can do, or having Neptune in the eighth house natally, it's a weird kind of death wish where you can, and it's Neptune's strange. Neptune idolizes things. So Neptune going through the seventh house, you can idolize your partner. Then it goes into the eighth house. You can idolize sex. You can idolize death. You could even idolize the IRS. I don't know why you would, but you could. There's just an idealism that gets weird wherever Neptune is. So in his case, what is beginning to happen is Neptune is hitting this moon. And moon, remember, it's women. So regardless of your gender, but if you're someone who dates women, is attracted to women, and Neptune hits your moon, you can meet someone who you're just like, she is the greatest, right? Because I just said that there's idealism. You don't like Neptune usually doesn't inspire you to take rapid action, which he didn't. I mean, maybe he did. Didn't read the biography. But you're not like, I need to lock this down now. It's just like, she is so great. I want to be with her. I feel better when I'm around her. It's that type of thing. And this would have lasted for several years. So, if you're trying to meet a woman and you have Neptune on your moon, it can be great. It can be great. But when Neptune moves on, so too does the idealism. So you can meet like the best woman ever, and then Neptune moves on and you're like, oh, but she has some personality. Shit. Or she, has horrible taste in shoes, or, something that kind of knocks them off their pedestal eventually. We're all humans. Neptune doesn't like to remember that. That's the TLDR of Neptune. So that's what happened here. And then just a fun note, you'll notice that Saturn happens to be up at the very top of his chart. That tends to be a fame peak time for fame. And I believe that was actually the case here. Okay, that's 1958 and Johnny Cash, as well as amphetamines. Now we're in 1962 with Johnny Cash, and this is when he left his wife. This is when he left his wife. So let's notice he's Pisces rising, right? So ruler of Pisces is Neptune. Traditional ruler is here. It's Jupiter in Leo. Pluto had been conjuncting this Neptune. So that can be very much a bid for freedom. But wherever your chart ruler is and something heavy transits that means you, like something is happening to you. But given that he has this Neptune-Sun opposition, this Pluto transit is also a major ego situation happening. So it's a major ego hit. So big life change. That's That's what this is. And then the North Node had just been conjunct, because remember, it moves backwards, the Jupiter. So that's also like kind of a surge in enthusiasm for like, yes, time to get free. So that's 1962 for Johnny Cash. Man, I should have... Ugh. I just realized I screwed up. So we are going to go back to Elizabeth Taylor, and we're going to do 1958. See, I already did this video once. I just get so excited, guys, because it's cool. So remember 1958? This is sad. Sadness warning. This is the day that Mike Todd died, which was one of Elizabeth Taylor's husbands, okay? And so here we are with some sadness. What do we see? Several things. Pluto, of course I'm going to start with Pluto. Pluto is in the Pluto house, which is the 8th house. It was for 30 years. It's still in there right now because it's 1958. What's it doing? It's opposing her Mars. And when you have Pluto in the 8th house making an aspect to your Sun or Mars, regardless of your gender, during that 2 to 2.5 year span, if you don't have something male die, I want to hear about it, because you are magic. That it's just what happens. It can be your male cat. It or hamster, but something male tends to die, or you tend to be in a major power struggle with a man. Look, right after Mike Todd died, what did Elizabeth Taylor do? She ran off with Eddie Fisher. So she had a death, and then she had an intense experience with a man. These are things that happened. Also, Uranus, also in the 8th house, is making that in conjunct to her Sun. That's a sudden event having to do with men. These two things are happening at the same time. And you can see how conspiratorial these lineups can be. So Johnny Cash was meeting June Carter and getting hooked on amphetamines. Elizabeth Taylor was dealing with death. Finally, I think that's what I want to do. I can keep going, but I just want to point out that Mercury here is conjunct her Uranus, and that is a really quick transit, and it's not going to happen to you every time you have Mercury conjunct Uranus, but every once in a while when Mercury makes an aspect to Uranus, you get some shocking news. So something out of nowhere. And remember, this transit here with Uranus in the 8th house is also in conjuncting her Mercury. So this is a double whammy, which is Stephen Arroyo's term, two contacts happening at the same time, which are different manifestations of the same energy. So you have Uranus and Mercury, and Uranus and Mercury. Got it? Also in Elizabeth Taylor's chart, 7th house here, ruled by Mercury. So sudden, having to do with significant others. Yes? Good. Okay. So, yes, 1962, Elizabeth Taylor met Richard Burton. I just picked the middle of 1962 for this, because I don't have exact dates for either Taylor or Cash. And again, not reading biographies here, just doing broad strokes. What do we see? Well, several things. So Pluto now is leaving the 8th house. It's in the 9th house for the first time. See how that's 30 years of Pluto in the 8th house? Pluto did a bang-up job creating drama in this woman's life. And she had near-death experiences, and she did it all. And Pluto is leaving, but it is also making an aspect to her Sun and her Mercury, so meeting someone, an important man who changes the trajectory of her 7th house, and then also her 8th house, because the sign of Leo is contained within her 8th house. So this is a big deal transit having to do with men. Yay! Uranus is still in this 8th house, though, so it's still making noise. The transiting North Node is still in the 8th house. Well, it is in the 8th house, meaning that there is the potential to really connect with someone in a deep way, or experience death, or near death, etc., etc. But important time for Elizabeth Taylor. Again, nicely represented by the sky. And in this case, Neptune is headed for her moon, which is the ruler of her 8th house, but I don't know exactly what happened there because I didn't go over her whole entire life. So last thing, and we're going back to Johnny Cash. I know. Now that I'm near the end, I'm like, oh, I've jumped back and forth a lot. Okay, this is when Johnny Cash married June Carter. Yay, congratulations to them. Several things. So as you can see, this is the 7th house here. Pluto is headed into it. Uranus is already in it. He didn't have any planets natally in the 7th house. This is the South Node, and this is not a planet. And so heavy outer planets entering the 7th house means that there is an urgency about 7th house things, which can be business partners, but it's usually your significant other. So the need to figure out his significant other situation and marry June Carter is represented here. Additionally, this Venus here is beginning to be transited by Saturn, which is not romantic. This is figuring out your finances and locking down your relationships. So if you are in one of those situations where it's like, yeah, we should get married, well, that's Saturn talking. The North Node, on the other hand, is an aspect of excitement when it hits Uranus and Venus together. That's more of the like enthusiasm for like, yeah, let's do this. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. It's not an awful time to get married. It is a good time to be realistic about what you are entering into. And so that's nice. Okay. Yay. The last thing that I want to say about these birthday twins is there are 2 talented people, 2 super famous people, and 2 people who were activists. So that's a commonality that we're gonna mostly attribute right here to the Venus-Uranus combo. Of course, for Elizabeth Taylor, it meant a ridiculous amount of marriages, but she was out there ahead of everyone else demanding action on HIV/AIDS. If you were alive, you remember that she was in people's faces saying, do something now. Johnny Cash was big on Native American issues and wanting justice for Native Americans as well as some of the disenfranchised. That's what a lot of his art was about. And both of them had this deep empathy for things that were larger than themselves, and then they were not afraid to speak up for what was important. So while the biographical items about their lives are incredibly different, right? The energies are very similar when you take like 10 big steps back and look at the macro picture of who these people were and what they were about and the legacies that they left. So I hope that I've if I've been successful, I've made the point that you can have the same energy and it can portray itself in very different and stark ways, and yet at peak times planetary activity causes things to happen in your life that are like big ticket items, but they're both very different with similarities that you might not expect. And that's what I thought was cool about this. So I apologize if that's a little bit disjointed. I find this hard to fit into words. But I also thought that it was really cool and I wanted to share. And that's what I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. Be in contact with me if you have suggestions of things that you would like me to cover. I'll probably continue to be disconnected from news for a couple more months, but I do anticipate getting back to this with more regularity a little bit in the future when things are a little bit less weird for me. So thank you for listening, and this has been fun to do for you.